Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units I would add this week. The first one, the San Francisco 49ers. So the 49ers coming off bye. Could actually get them now on your waiver wire. And they got a great matchup coming up. The Tennessee Titans. I give up the second most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I know Tennessee, they went out there, put up 31 points at the Browns. And I know the Browns, pretty decent defense, no doubt about it this season. But I think San Francisco, home game, Tennessee coming in. It was a fluky type of game I thought last week for Tennessee. San Francisco could go out there and be a good option for fantasy owners, and they're out there in 77% of fantasy leagues. So the last few weeks, week 10 versus the Rams, got the doors blown off, 42 points allowed, a sack in that one. Week 11 at Arizona, 22 points allowed, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery. Week 12 versus the Panthers, 9 points allowed, a sack, 2 interceptions. And week 13 at the Browns, 8 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. So like I said, this week I'm playing the matchup. It's a good matchup, obviously, for this 49 team. Cam Ward, I think they're going to have trouble moving the football. Tony Pollard did nothing all season long until last week's breakout game. And Robert Saleh is one of the better defensive coordinators in the league. So with all those factors, I like the Niners this week as an add. The next DST, the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're playing great football. First place now is this Jacksonville Jaguar team in their division. Obviously, Daniel Jones went out and they beat him in last week's game. And they're 9-4 in the season. Season is this Jacksonville Jaguar team. So this week, good matchup. So New York Jets that give up the 9th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And this Jet team, they might be down to their third string quarterback, like Brady Cook, where we saw obviously Tyrod Taylor, he left the game early with a groin injury in last week's loss versus the Dolphins. And Justin Fields, he wasn't available. He was inactive for that ball game. So it possibly could be Brady Cook. And just let's say this New York Jet team is going to be in for a long day, where Cook went for 163 yards and 2 interceptions, where he played a majority of the game at 30 attempts. So this Jaguar team, like I said, they're playing great football of late. Their defense has definitely improved. And over the last few weeks, they're putting up some nice numbers. Week 11 versus the Chargers, 6 points allowed, 3 sacks and INT. Week 12 at Arizona, 18 points allowed, 6 sacks. Week 13 at the Titans, 3 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. And week 14 versus the Colts in the big victory for them, 19 points allowed, sack, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery, and a safety. So like I said, if Cook's in there quarterback, it could be a long day for this New York Jet team. And if it's either Fields, Taylor, it doesn't matter. I think Jacksonville, regardless, is a good pickup. But if the third string Cook's the quarterback, that could be in for a bigger game this week is this DST. The next DST is the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, they're out there in tons of fantasy leagues. I know they had a tough matchup at the Green Bay Packers and lost, giving up 28 points, only a sack and an interception in that one. But right now, Chicago, they're out there in tons of fantasy leagues in 79%. And their defense gets to the quarterback, and they do create turnovers at times. Week 12 versus Pittsburgh, 22 points allowed, 2 sacks and INT, a fumble recovery. Week 13 at Philly, 15 points allowed, interception and fumble recovery. In week 14, like I said, at Green Bay, 28 points allowed, a sack and INT. But this week, a good matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. Give up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I know Shador and this offense, they put up 29 points in that game, and Sanders had 4 total touchdowns. But still, it's going to be a different type of game, I think, where Chicago's obviously a better defense than the Tennessee Titans. And, teams have more tape on Shador as well, where this bad team could adjust. So this week, while they're out there in tons of leagues there and there this week, the next DST is the Dallas Cowboys. I know last week they gave up 44 points at the Lions, but this Minnesota Viking offense isn't the Detroit Lions. I know Minnesota, they had a nice game, and they won that one pretty easily versus a depleted Washington Commander team in week 14. But this Dallas team definitely improved with the trades and guys returning, even though last week it was obviously a horrible ball game, giving up 44 points. But they had Quentin Williams get Overshown back in the lineup, and obviously Logan Wilson they traded for as well. It's definitely been better the last 3 out of 4 weeks, this defense. Week 12 versus Philly, 21 points allowed, a sack, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 13 versus Kansas City, 28 points allowed, 3 sacks. And week 14, like I said, at Detroit, they gave up a ton of points, 44 points, a sack, a block kick. But J.J. McCarthy, I know, returned to the lineup last week for this Viking team. He put up points. He made plays, no doubt about it, for Minnesota. But like I said, this Dallas defense, they could get to J.J. in this one. They got a good pass rush now, adding Quentin Williams, getting Overshown back in the lineup. And also as well, this offensive line I don't think is all that great. So with those factors, I know Dallas, they've been a hit-or-miss defense this season. They are out there in 89% of fantasy leagues. And a DST I would add this week in the final DST is the Carolina Panthers. You could actually add them as well off the waiver wire, out there in 96% of fantasy leagues, and they got a pretty good matchup coming up at the Saints. I give up the 5th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. Even though Tyler Shuck, he's definitely played better football, and the Saint team, their offense has actually been formidable at times, putting up points. But I still think Carolina coming off the bye, and they got a good pass rush to Shuck early and often, and have a nice ball game. Week 11 at Atlanta, 27 points allowed, a fumble recovery. Week 12 at San Francisco, 20 points allowed, 3 interceptions. In Week 13 versus a great Ram offense, 28 points allowed, but they had the 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, one of them for a pick 6 and a fumble recovery. So like I said, to see Carolina go out there versus the Rams before the bye, win that game and have a monster game on defense, I think in New Orleans, especially coming off a bye, could go in there and make plays and put up fantasy points. And they're out there 96% of fantasy leagues. That's a few defense DST units I would add for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.